So, hello and welcome back to the Cloud Council. Thank you for joining us. So, for those of you joining us for the first time, a reminder that we're here to bring you expert advice from industry experts, C-level executives, and commentators to help you through this time of unprecedented disruption and uncertainty, and to bring you actionable insights and advice going forward. Today, we're going to be talking about delivering business agility through your tech strategy. And I couldn't think of two better guests than Tom Brown, Head of Infrastructure Engineering at IG, and Dominic Maidment, Technology Architect at Total Gas and Power, to take us through that discussion. A very warm welcome to you both.
Thanks.
Hey, Tom.
So for those watching, just a reminder, you can send us questions to our experts live in real time here to the email address advice@thecloudcouncil.com. So please email in and we'll try and get time to take your questions here. So let's turn to our guests today and just help our viewers understand a little bit of background. So you are in different sectors, in energy and financial services, but I think a number of similarities in terms of what you do, looking at the trading side, and also probably what you're going through right now. So give us a little bit of background about what you do. And let's start, please, with Dom.
Hi, okay. So I'm the technology architect for Total Gas and Power in the UK. We are the largest dual, that's gas and power supplier in the UK B2B space. Our customers are of all sizes, from commercial, industrial and public sectors. And we've been operating, say, 25 plus years. We've got a number of different subsidiaries in European countries, but primarily our focus is in the UK. So our customers as a whole, they're expecting us to keep the lights on, to keep business running. It's never been more important that they can trust what we promise to deliver to them. So that puts a huge, onus and burden on all of the systems, all of the IT. Right through to making sure that business models and the way that we operate is sustainable in changing times. So that's who we are, and it's good to be here.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about what you've done to help you get through this period. Tom, tell us a little bit more about IG.
So IG is a CFD and FX platform based in the UK. Been going about 45 years now. Broadly, we are providing platform to retail clients, although we do some B2B activities. We are London headquartered, but we have offices throughout the world. We have major tech hubs in places like Bangalore and Krakow. So we have a dispersed workforce. We have a platform that people rely on to do their trading. So we have to ensure, especially at times like this, during high volatility, that platform is available, stable, and they can rely on it so they can explore the financial markets at a time when there is a lot of opportunity to be had, and provide them with the comfort that they can trust and put their faith in our platform so they can do well in the current situation and over time always, of course.
Got it. So we'll talk a little bit about the now, but I think it'd be just useful maybe to go back a little bit. You've both been, involved and responsible for change programs, transformation programs, from a technology perspective in your organizations. Give us a sense of how important it was kind of when you were planning things out to build flexibility in your infrastructure and architecture to ready yourselves for a situation like we're going through right now. Again, Dom, maybe you want to start off here.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I think anything that makes your road rocky, or you want to use the analogy of choppy waters, anything you can do to smooth that down in terms of reducing complexity is very, very important. So in terms of having flexibility to be able to do that, to be able to do more with less, I think those are two things that have been extremely important in terms of preparing for transformation and modernization programs. So knowing that you're not going to suddenly run out of road, or you're going to have unpredictable demands on your compute, storage, whatever you have, is a great thing. So, capacity planning, all the things that comes with modern, flexible, cloud-like technologies, they're all things which you need to completely understand and have completely under your control before you can start doing all the really, really difficult stuff, or your actual transformation processing, all of your business remodeling, all the things that won't just go into the cloud, as people say. Cloud is a bit of a misnomer now. I think some people get very upset. If you talk about digital transformation, people's eyes glaze over. If you go, it's the cloud, I think it's like a magical place. The technologies that underpin these things are all about abstracting out problems which have plagued organizations, that have stopped them from scaling out projects, have stopped them from running their businesses coherently, whilst they're waiting for something to be upgraded. So flexible scaling technologies that are relatively easy to use are a great asset.
And that's kind of easier in a greenfield environment. Neither of you, embarked on that journey in a greenfield environment. How easy is that when you're dealing with legacy and that mixed environment?
I think the key, it was mentioned, but the key is simplicity. And simple. I always refer to kind of two phrases: fewer different things and more simple things, because simple things are generally, you can make them more flexible. But if you have fewer things, there are fewer things to consider. And if things are simple, then things like automation are naturally more simple to achieve, because if you have something overly complicated, you can't really automate it very well, not reliably at least. So it's all about simplicity, and simplicity is key. Now, yes, it's all well and good in greenfield situations, but the reality is they're quite few and far between. Or you might have a greenfield environment, but you still might have to take something that is legacy and bring it into a greenfield environment, which is also not simple. But to me, it's actually about abstracting application workloads away from underlying infrastructure or compute platforms, because even if the application overlay is still a bit complicated, if you're under the hood, if you're simplifying things, then by the virtue of doing that, when it does come to move the thing that's lying on top, it actually becomes naturally a lot more simple, because a lot of the complexity has already been taken away. You're not fighting with large storage arrays necessarily. You're not fighting with large lumps of physical compute. You've kind of already broken that back-end systems down. You've got some simplistic application overlay over the top, which you can then tackle via many different containerization functions, depending on where you're putting these things. But it's understanding the underlying infrastructure, simplifying it, removing levels of complexity, and then tackling that application layer on top.
Dom, you agree with that?
Yeah, I was just, it's almost like sort of playing back all the things I've been saying over the last couple of years. It's exactly the same story. So, you're a company that's, let's say you're 20 plus years, everyone has implemented systems over those years. They haven't necessarily known the minds of the people that are going to come later, or have forward views of the technology there. So with all the best intentions, you end up with a certain amount of technical debt. So you've got to factor that into, how are you going to modernize that? How are you going to do that abstraction? Because the things that you're trying to abstract, the things that you're trying to get away from, the value that you're trying to retain, your crown jewels, your intellectual property, those things which are making your business profitable, you've got to protect them. So they're most likely languishing on old systems which are not happy. They may not be x86. They might want to go to a cloud-like environment. So you need to figure out what you're going to do with those. So yeah, absolutely. What you can do to get your applications to a state where they will travel is super important to understand. I might say it's easy to do. It's not easy at all. But
I have a question here. Sorry, Dom, to cut you off. I've got a question here just on the live feed that kind of talks to this a little bit. Maybe to Tom, based on what you're saying about simplifying and doing fewer different things, which is specifically talking about number of applications and how you reduce the number of applications or application complexity you have. I guess the same applies to infrastructure. How do you make the decision on what you get rid of, as well as what new things you introduce?
Well, I think it also you can also say what you're going to just leave behind, because also there's a lot of return on investment decisions to be made, and if there's if you can categorize your workloads into high business criticality, something somewhere in the middle that provides an element of value, but is if it didn't operate for a little period of time, wouldn't be the end of the world, and then some other things just tick over. They may or may not do something depending on who you talk to, so you might decide to just leave those alone. But it's about the main problem is a lot of people with legacy, a lot of knowledge is lost over the years for various reasons. And so the criticality of what is left behind or what applications you do have can be unknown. And sometimes you just do have to take a long time to start to dive into those more legacy applications, figure out exactly what they do. Are they in fact doing something identical to something that sat next to them? Are they very bespoke? Do they actually do anything that adds value to your true value to your business? If they do, then invest time, effort, and energy to move them to somewhere more suitable, if indeed that is what is needed. Or there's nothing wrong necessarily in just leaving them alone if the conscious decision is they're not providing any value. They're moving some widget between A and B once a month. If it didn't happen, it's not the end of the world. We can do it in a different way and then tackle it later. But I think a lot of it comes down to understanding the criticality of the things running, and that does take effort. There is no magic bullet to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. And we just shift a little bit, talk about cloud. Dom, you mentioned it, this magical place. Give us a sense of your journey to the cloud, your journey, no doubt, in a hybrid cloud world today. How has that been? Has that enabled more flexibility? Has that introduced new challenges that you're having to deal with?
Okay, so I suppose the starting place for us was it was a DR purpose. We had already started looking at some of the cloud technologies, and the concept of a private cloud. Looked at a few converged technologies, finally settled on HCI for a convergence standard. And when we found that right level of abstraction, it became apparent to us that actually some of our problems were around the relationships between vendors when picking our cloud technologies. So once we'd settled and become comfortable that we were going to call what we had in our data center a private cloud due to the way it all hung together and the vendor solutions that we had in place, we then had to make sure that all of those vendors, for instance, allowed support agreements to be in place, that those agreements were portable to the public cloud should we wish to make use of that sets of estates or functionality. So in moving our workload and emulating the things that wouldn't move properly, we've come to understand more about our TCO and our operating costs there. But we've also discovered that whilst you're doing all of this stuff, and you're maintaining the value of those systems that are running on them, you're not actually going to get any thanks for moving stuff or tidying things up unless you can actually broadcast the value of doing that to your stakeholders. So you've got to report back. You've got to have an idea of and a fixed grasp of what you were spending on your maintenance, your time and materials, and all the heroism that your infrastructure teams were having to undertake at 3 a.m. A lot of that's swallowed up in the noise of making money in day-to-day business. So unless you've got a flash or fancy project on the go, no one's really going to thank you all that much until you run into a BCP situation, probably. So that's fairly topical at the moment, but it's not like the building's gone. It's a lights out situation at the moment. So it's bearing in mind, and keeping your messages clear more than necessarily even the difficulties in moving systems onto cloud-like platforms.
Yeah, and
I just want to say one thing about cloud. In our world, cloud is not a destination. It's not some place that you end up and then you cease to move anymore, right? It's just an option we have available to us. And actually, we don't really talk about cloud per se. We try to talk about workloads, and it's all about, taking your workload and understanding what it does and putting the right workload in the right place for the right reason. So rather than having a discussion about, public cloud vendor A, B, and C, or running in your own data center, it's more about, okay, what is the thing doing? What do we need it to do for our customers? And so based on, some of those decisions, where is it best to run it? And where does it make the most sense to run it? And to try and avoid that kind of somewhat heated debate sometimes about should this run in a public cloud or in our own data center or somewhere else. It's more about what do we need it to do? Where should it do that? And put it where it makes most logical sense, rather than it being in one destination just because it happens to end up there. So as soon as you remove the kind of the word cloud around anything, which people generally think of as a public provider, it helps to frame that decision. The positive of that is actually we also try and deploy or deliver the same type of capabilities to our developers, whether it's in a public cloud, a private cloud, or somewhere else. So I think it keeps us honest to ourselves that if somebody is pushing for it to deploy somewhere, it's because they're not thinking it's quicker or easier to deploy it to destination X. They're putting it there for the right reason. But that also puts pressure on us to make sure we have tooling and process and capabilities right. But then again, we benefit from that as well. So to us, it's not about a public cloud or not decision. It's about take the workload, deliver it where it's going to add most value.
And then, Tom, if that changes over time due to the maturity of the application or business changes, how easy is it to flex back from that decision?
Portability is always something we do bake into decisions. We don't try and, although it's quite hard, I think if you don't choose a destination based on capability, then some of the value of that destination is lost. Therefore, trying to be completely agnostic to the destination is probably unwise, just because some of the value add is lost. That said, if it is running, a somewhat relatively lightweight service in a public cloud region where we don't have a presence, our own physical presence, we can take advantage of that relatively quickly. We can prove something out. We can start to return some value, and then we can reassess that and go, is it right to continue to run it in somebody else's data center? Is everything stacking up as we thought? If something's doing really well in a region we don't have our own data center, then that can also help us to make a decision that maybe we need to start to invest in that region. So as long as you don't get locked in, and I don't mean locked in necessarily from a technical point of view, I mean locked in from a decision point of view, because you can always rework things slightly in order to run it somewhere else. I think there's slight nuance in that is around data and some of the data analysis tooling that does generally be, the capability is similar, but the application is different depending on where you're doing that data analysis. But in terms of generalized workloads, we try and keep things as flexible as possible. And actually, with the advent of obviously containerization, that makes things that bit easier, because that by nature of the thing, it does become more portable.
Yeah, agreed. And then I guess you brought in data here. You're both in highly regulated industries. How does that play a part in some of that decisioning?
It's quite hard. It actually, for us, it's less of a technology decision and generally more around the kind of legal space about where, as a business, do we feel comfortable data residing, and also how do we, and if we do feel comfortable, then it does become slightly technological in terms of, okay, how do we get data between X and Y in a way that we feel comfortable? But actually, that's the data question is generally more, not technology related for us, because we feel quite comfortable in the technologies, whether on premises or elsewhere for data. It's more around how comfortable the business is. And actually, if I was to ask that question to our business probably 2 years ago, they'd be really uncomfortable. Now we've done a lot of work, a lot of due diligence with various third parties who have answered questions well enough for us to accept that some data will never leave because of various reasons, but the majority of data that we would want to leave so that we can take advantage of it in the systems that it is then going to reside, we are now quite comfortable with allowing a third party to host it for us, basically.
I think that's really important to understand, is that third party aspect, right? So your assets, your IP, that's effectively in someone else's data center. So I think you hit absolutely on the head on the nail on the head. Everything looks like a nail when you have a hammer. It's important to have those risks articulated in such a concise manner that you can show them to whichever body is doing your compliance, is doing your regulation. If you have a large parent company, for instance, that has very strict rules, you need to be able to absolutely satisfy those things, and be 100% adherent to them. So understanding the classification of your data, understanding, what's appropriate for public or private cloud. I think third parties can do a lot to help you. But ultimately it's, you're taking that risk profile back to the business.
Got it. So just like back here and given here we're talking about business agility, we've talked a little bit today about abstraction, portability, some of those techniques. Given I guess what we're going through now, what sort of techniques and decisions that you've made in the past are lending themselves well for you to respond to the current situation, whether it's around DevOps or other agile processes, and again, what kind of best practices can you share with the viewers here?
From our point of view, capacity agility has been the key. So it's been a highly volatile time. It's been well known for in all the news. Stock markets have been up and down. Any major swings like that have caused a lot of volatility in the markets. We have seen unprecedented trading volumes, and we've been able to adapt to those trading volumes pretty easily, actually, frankly, which is actually a really positive thing. However, we've only been able to do that because of decisions we made, quite a number of years ago around, virtualizing where possible. And it's not about virtualizing everything. We run trading systems which are and pricing systems which are inherently not that suitable to virtualization. It's not that they can't be, but there's elements and nuances within their profiles which make them not entirely suitable. And it kind of goes back to the right workload on the right thing for the right reason. And this doesn't only apply to public cloud. However, the systems that we've actually seen the greatest strain on in recent times has actually been around client type activity, account signups, login processes, balance, those types of client activity that historically people didn't do that frequently, but at the moment, because everything's so volatile, people are logging in, changing charts, doing things a lot more frequently. That has made those systems become under pressure. But because those systems are virtualized, adding capacity in has been virtually trivial. And we've been able to do it, 24/7, 365. Throughout the day, we haven't waited for specific windows of opportunity to do this. We've seen profiles, we've seen things get a little bit hot. We've been able to add capacity, ride out those storms, make some improvements. And it's that flexibility and agility in the workloads, but within the underlying infrastructure that has enabled us to do that with broadly very little disruption. Yes, we have had to add physical capacity to the infrastructure layers. However, again, that is a relatively simple process for us now. So it's not, we have a lot of this capacity on shelves because we have a relatively flexible approach to infrastructure. We have very few different things at the pure infrastructure level, so we can make them do explicit what we want it to do. Therefore, if we need to add virtualized capacity, we can take something, bring that capability in, and install it in a pretty light touch. So actually, we've done it's been very busy, but we've been able to apply capacity where it's needed with very little disruption, if any, which has been a really positive thing. Which, if this was all sat on physical tin locked away potentially in a third-party data center, it would have not been in any way as near as smooth as it was.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's when you're running modern virtualization technologies that can scale, it's just a huge difference, from having to receive things into your buildings, from having to have 3 different skill sets of things. I can, wholeheartedly agree on having simpler things or less things which are simple. All of those things, they all add up. So when you get to a pinch point, it's not a complete nightmare. It's not where you have to suddenly roll out an entire sort of arduous day and night operation to get something done. You can just react. So I think the investments that certainly my company's made have enabled us to be able to provide different types of access to our systems, which we never thought we would have to, because those roles were only ever in an office in a predictable location. And then, having to extrapolate that across, VPNs, etc., different points of presence, all those sort of things. It's the ability to deploy and the ability to choose the ways you want to be able to give those systems and those services out. So that has been an absolute benefit there. So as things continue, I can't foresee there being any sort of crazy problems that we can't deal with our current stack. But it's IT. There's no days the same usually, even when it feels like Groundhog Day when you're working from home.
Indeed, yeah. Well, congratulations to both of you for for putting in the investments and the foresight and the planning to be able to sustain where we are. I've got a question here again on the live feed that's just come in that sort of talks to something we were touching on earlier around TCO. And I think, Dom, you mentioned it in the context of cloud and having to prove that internally and not it just being this magical destination. Specifically, the question is around, as we've now got a variety of different consumption models available in the market, how has that adapted your relationship with finance, treasury? How have you brought them along on the journey, and do you foresee that changing in the future?
Okay, so that's an interesting one. Having gone from traditional systems where you are making large capital purchases and things like that, I think there's definitely a shift towards your variable spend and what looks like a massive increase on your OPEX costs, because everything in the cloud is a subscription model generally. And that includes and can include the way that you do your licensing for your private cloud as well. So I think having a clear definition of what you're buying for hardware, finding ways to abstract your hardware costs from your software costs is very important, because unless you can inform your businesses, your finance, etc., how you're making those purchases, if you're cash rich, you may just buy them outright, those assets, or if it makes more sense, to fold that into maybe a purchasing agreement or something. So I think it's definitely changed my perspective in terms of purchasing, IT purchasing. That has been sort of static and fairly rigid over the years. It's now become about procuring services. So it's almost like that abstraction layer is sort of shifting about and affecting your procurement and finance cycle.
Got it. Tom, similar experiences for you?
Yeah, I think it's broadly for us down to the fact of, because we're not buying special things particularly anymore. So we can actually, there's a project can come along, and if we can invest in some infrastructure for it, whether that's in our data center or elsewhere. But if that project doesn't work out, it's now no longer the case that we're stuck with assets that we can't do anything with, because we're broadly using a very small number of assets in our data center that they're not tied to any one specific project. If it doesn't work out how we expect, that's fine. We can just use it for something else. We're not particularly out of pocket. We actually do prefer within our business capex spend. So actually, some subscription models are less attractive to us, but we can generally tweak things around to make it work. So for us, buying something for an intended use, it not quite working out, and then using it for something else, we're totally fine with that. We're flexible in that because, you can't always, know how something's going to end up. And that applies to the public cloud as well. And that's why there is the attraction in a public cloud, because you can start relatively small, do a level of experimentation and not incur too much expense. Now, but if you can actually offer the same type of capability in your own data center, then it comes down to that other decisions, which are probably more meaty technology decisions, which are actually the more interesting ones to have, rather than, oh, this is cheap, therefore let's put it over here, kind of thing, which is probably not the right type of conversation to be having. So in our world, flexibility in infrastructure, making sure that we can buy something and use it in multiple different ways, therefore we can reallocate resources, and actually it helps with our the life cycle of actual infrastructure. So if something is running a system that is deemed critical to the business, has to be run as fast as possible, the latest and greatest infrastructure. In 2 years, when that is now not the latest and greatest, we can cycle that out, put it to work doing something else, which is perfectly capable of doing. Cycle something else in to replace the hardware that's gone, and the cost is not that great. We're not buying huge, great storage arrays anymore. We're not buying huge, great blade arrays that after 5 years or 3 years that we are getting rid of, and then there's a huge upfront expense again. The cost to get going might be slightly high, but as soon as you're up and running, it's actually relatively low cost activity. And so then, and the whole capacity thing, just add a little bit in. So it just helps us keep greater control on our numbers.
Got it. Thank you, Tom. So listen, I think for those watching, as we come to a close here and thinking, hey, wish I'd done that, or kind of either embarking on this journey of building out, kind of a more flexible, agile architecture, or indeed are on the journey and maybe are struggling and need to make some course corrections. Perhaps both of you just leave us with a couple of insights, best practices that you would recommend either embarking on or course correcting on that journey. What would you say, Dom, to the viewers here?
Probably covers any IT purchasing or any program. Is what are you actually trying to do? What are you actually trying to do for the business? What is this problem that you're trying to solve? Then apply the technology to it, rather than finding something really cool, which is very, very tempting to in this massive market, and then trying to shoehorn the business processes into it. So that would probably be my first one. My second one would be, again, I can't stress how much those vendor agreements are important, because not every vendor is friends. Everyone's eating each other's dinner, right? So it's not like, they can just pop up and say, it's easy, can't you do it? There's no way out of it. Quite often you've signed up for 5 years or 3 years or what have you. And some of those support agreements are prohibitive in terms of, most vendors can't even agree on what a hypervisor is. So, it's being very, very clear about the stacks that you're going to deploy, and being very, very commercially aware of who's buying who. Do you have a purple hat on your hands now from a Red Hat and IBM purchase, for instance? How does that change your support and software and things like that? So it's being commercially aware, read the small print, and make sure you're solving a business problem rather than just trying out something cool and something new.
Got it. Thank you, Dom. And Tom?
First and foremost, simplicity. Yes, understand exactly what you're trying to achieve, but do it in the most simple way, because something that starts out as broadly simple but a bit complicated 5 years down the line will be really complicated. Make it as simple as possible from the start. Get some ground rules in place so that you can stick to it. Make the simple way the easy way. Therefore, that's the only way people will do things. And I think, just touching on the vendor piece, make sure you got vendors that are open. And I think openness in vendors is probably the most critical thing. Make sure you can have, a conversation with those vendors all in the same room, all at the same time. So they actually work together as a partnership with you. You're not a customer, you're a partner in the relationship. And I think vendors that are open and vendors that will have that conversation and work with you and your other vendors in a cohesive unit, you will always come out more successful.
Yeah.
Tom, I think great place to finish there. Thank you very much for your insights, both of you. We've talked a lot, covering a big topic on business agility. We've talked about flexibility, simplicity, abstraction, portability. So covered some broad ground here. So thank you both for all your insights. Just a reminder to everyone watching, a full write-up of this discussion and an on-demand version will be available to you at the Cloud Counsel website. That's nutanix.com/CXO/Cloud Counsel. And you can also view other on-demand episodes there. So with that, I'll say thank you very much again to my guests, Tom Brown and Dom Maidment. Join us again here at the Cloud Counsel for more great advice from experts like Dom and Tom, and see you next time.